Welcome back to another build update for my slide-in truck camper. This week's is a little bit longer because as the winter months are approaching, I figured I would do well to accelerate my progress a little bit. I'm concerned, as I've mentioned before, about not being able to cure the external fiberglass without artificially heating the garage. I'd prefer not to do that. I can, but it would just be a lot easier if I could let Mother Nature take care of business for me. But it's here I am a week after the footage from this video, and it's already getting pretty dynamic with our fall weather here in Utah. So probably not going to get the project done without the extra heating, but it's still my objective to take a trip down to Arizona to see family at Thanksgiving time. So I'm committed to make it happen by whatever means I need to here, as long as it doesn't get too extreme. Here I'm working on the nose panel. It's a similar construction to the other ones that I made, basically a sandwich panel using this cheap Luan plywood as the sides and 1x2s in the center. In this case, I meant to put my diagonals for the 1x2s such that they were in compression, pushing up from the bottom corners up to the center, since this is essentially the truss that supports the floor. I don't know that it really makes any difference, but in my mind I got things backwards and ended up putting them the wrong way anyway. So well, not wrong, but not the way I intended. I didn't bother to change it because I don't know that it really matters that much. I'm sure I'll have plenty of strength in it anyway, but that's how I was thinking when I started. Also, with increasing the time I'm putting into it, I have more footage, and so a little more editing to do, and I didn't add a lot of editing time to my schedule just because I added build time. So if this video isn't the highly polished and refined example of what I can do that you are used to, I have to apologize. But little joke there. So here I'm test fitting it on the nose. As you can see, the plywood extends down there and is flush against the face of the platform in the front there. Then I'm also testing some ideas for the angle. The one I ended up picking, it's about a 16-inch from front to back on the panel, which is about what I ended up designing in the CAD. I went back and checked my original design, and so looks like there's something about that angle that just looks right to me, so that's what I did. Now coming up here, I ended up needing to cut a bevel on the edge of the plywood, or on the panel here, and I wasn't thinking ahead of time, and I ended up putting a bunch of staples too far out on the edge where I needed the bevel. So when it came time to cut it, I started cutting into it and saw sparks and immediately stopped. Carbide tip blade or not, I only had a wood cutting blade on my saw there, and it wasn't going to last long if I kept doing that. So I had to put I had to get a metal cutting blade for it so that I could cut through both the wood and the staples. But it turns out that for that saw I couldn't find a blade that has, I think it's a 5mm arbor, and the steel cutting blade takes 10, I think. It was twice the size, and so I needed an adapter. Right there I got the sparks. So I went down a rabbit hole, couldn't find the adapter at 3 different stores, and so I decided to 3D print my own. And that became the rabbit hole because I ended up having problems with my printer, and I yammered on about my different tests as I was trying them. Obviously, if it doesn't hold it tight or concentric enough with the shaft, I'm going to get a bunch of vibration. That would be bad. But it turned out my printer was having issues, and I didn't see it at first, but it's like it was starving filament, and so I had some failed prints there. But I just used PLA, and here I'm kind of test fitting one of the examples, and once I realized my printer was getting worse and I didn't want to spend even more time trying to figure it out, I went ahead and ran with one of the best test prints that I got. I was trying to zero in on the exact dimensions. For anybody who 3D prints, you know that you can tell it you want so many millimeters, but that doesn't mean the printer is going to be right on. Not with PLA anyway. And so anyway, I got close enough. There was a little bit of play in it, but I tried it, and but here I am doing the cut, and it actually did a really good job. I was impressed. So if you have the same problem and uh, can't buy an arbor, uh, I'm here to say you can 3D print one. If I were to do really long cuts where the blade was going to get warm or hot, I'd be more concerned about my PLA softening, but in the way that I did it, didn't wasn't a problem. Here's where I forgot to remove that reference 1x2, closed the garage and tore off the corner there. And so that'll have to be repaired before the video is over. Here I'm finally, after going down the bevel cut rabbit hole and arbor printing and all that, I'm finally putting the thing on. I think it was after the weekend. Lots of screws, since that is a truss that holds up essentially the floor of the bunk area. And the more I work with this Luan plywood, the less I trust it. I think it'll work okay because of the way I'm building my camper, but I just don't trust it. The veneer on it is so poorly attached that even though you might get a good glue joint with the panel, if that veneer just peels off, separates, you're not going to have a very good joint. So I go heavy on the screws and the staples and make sure it's attached. This is a jump back in time before the screws are in, but anyway, that's about how it looked when I had it stapled up. Little flyby. Different camera, so it looks like I just got it out of order, but it's before I added the additional supports for it. So here now I'm working on the angled panel that it's angled for better aerodynamics, I guess, but it's built a little differently internally because it's part roof. And while I don't expect to go climbing over it a bunch, my escape hatch, if I'm not able to get out of the back door for some reason, is on the roof, or going to be on the roof. And so if I have to get out in an emergency, I will be basically sliding down this panel onto the windshield hood of the truck. And so, kind of like the floor of my bunk area, I the the plywood is too soft if you put your heel into it. And so I'm trying to add enough framing density or whatever so there's not too large of an unsupported span inside of there. And I figured the best way to do that was to go long ways. Well, I later, before I was done, ended up adding a bunch of other cross pieces to fill up the gaps a little better even. Doesn't have the diagonals, so but structurally I'm not even a little bit worried about it because it joins it at angles with the other two panels, the roof and that nose panel there. Anyway, that's kind of a flyby of the test fit there from the inside. And my damaged corner. As I understand it, that's supposed to be, that Luan is supposed to be mahogany. So I'm building a mahogany camper here. Only the best, right? So now I'm framing in the corner here, the undamaged side. It was raining that day and I was getting enough coming in the door that I kind of had to lower it. It makes a big difference on the lighting. And anyway, I don't think I put screws in it at this time because I don't think it's completely framed in on the inside. But getting it kind of shaped in there, ready to be trimmed up. Here I'm putting additional plywood panels on the floor of the bunk area because, like I said, it's not strong enough to take a heel directly. I've walked around on it enough that it's just over time I don't want to accidentally damage it, so just a precaution. So here I'm putting the diagonals in the wall panels. I expect quite a bit of the force will be coming down those walls. Obviously I did put the jack under there before I started tromping around in here, but the jack doesn't hold its position too long, and eventually I heard the 2x4s fall onto the ground, so it was supporting me without these diagonals or anything in place. Here's the right side diagonal matched up in the left hand side. As you can see, it was about a 1/4 inch taller, so the surprise, my dimensions aren't perfect from left to right, but actually I felt pretty good about that, and so I used it as a starting point for fashioning my left hand side diagonal and felt pretty good about how it turned out. I like to keep those fairly tight there. So as I was saying, the structure that is from that back wall there down to the front is kind of the triangle that supports the floorboards through the nose truss there, and I expect most of the stress is going through the plywood itself, which it obviously is. Well, on the floor supports quite a bit because it's cantilevered in the back there, but altogether I think it's going to be plenty strong. Should hold up to the hurricane force winds of driving down the road while the earthquake of riding on the back of a truck goes on. Probably built a little better than a house, but if I were to do it again, I can definitely think of things I would do probably better. So here I'm framing in the more of the wall panels that will support that sloped panel, and trying to work while crouching on a little stool because not much clearance up there, but I'm glad I'm doing it before I put the roof on. It would be a lot of fun crouching around in there with the roof on. Here I'm kind of marking up trying to figure out, at this point I was still kind of figuring out how I was going to repair that panel edge there. The extra piece of plywood there is to shim it because the second piece was not back yet on when I took that video. Here's why you don't close the garage while your tripod is poking up into that space. I'm actually quite impressed with that tripod. I'm still using it. I thought it was done for, but once I got the leg collapsed, it it might be a little bit more wobbly than before, but it's still working. So here's the second bevel cut on the other panel. It went a whole lot easier than the first one, since I didn't have to go do a bunch of research before doing it. And at this point, I decided to put some additional cross members in. Probably totally unnecessary, just dead weight, because on top of here there's going to be 2 inches of insulation and another panel. So it's the chance of a strong concentration of force on it is not very likely. It's not like I'm going to be routinely going across there anyway, but anyway, it is the way I tend to do things. The fit wasn't that tight. I just kind of placed them in there. It's more like honeycomb inside of a honeycomb panel. Unfortunately, it took some additional time to even out. The 1x2s I used were mostly kind of remnants, and some of them were quite a bit thicker than the others. If I'd noticed or paid more attention, I probably would have used more uniform thickness pieces so I didn't have to trim them all down later. But got the job done. So as usual, glue on the first side, liquid nails on the second, fill the gaps. Here I'm finally repairing that corner. I don't know that that's the best way to do that kind of a repair, but since it's going to be framed with 1x2s, I'm not too worried about it. I think it'll be plenty strong. And on the outside it's going to have 2 inches of foam insulation and another panel outside of that, and on the inside there will be another panel. So this repair here will never be seen in the final build. Yeah, right there it's reinforced pretty well along that edge. So, and by the time I'm done there will be a vertical along that whole gap there. So I thought about putting just another piece of plywood inside of it, but I really don't think that's necessary. Just like a patch. So here I'm prepping to install the sloped panel there. There was a bit of a bow in it, so I started by putting a screw in the center and pulling the bow out, and then put 2 on the sides as well, and had them ready to go so that once I got the glue on in the different directions it had to attach everything, I'd be ready with those 3 screws, able to kind of pull the panel into place tight right away. Then I added 5 pounds of screws and staples, and I don't think it's going anywhere, not without a fight anyway. And then all along that edge I was putting in, they're either 2 or 3 inch screws along that joint directly into through that beveled cut there, and so that's well attached as well. Trimming things up. So then, as far as the construction for this week, the final thing that I did was to add the trim around the top edges here. I still need to add some reinforcements in the wall, is the current plan, and so I'm not closing it in yet. May not until I have the roof on. We'll see. But that's, I think, about as far as we got. Thanks for watching. It's coming along. We're getting there, starting to look like a camper. And we'll see you next time.